If you have the need to have a different type of validation outside of what's handed to you out of the box from MVC, you can do true custom validation within here and build your own classes. These inherit from the validation attribute class. These can be client-side, server-side, or both. This also will greatly improve your user experience because it will be customized to exactly what you need. And these are done by decorating an object like within a range, for example below. Here we have required, which is out of the box attribute that we can use with an error message saying favorite number is required. And in bold you see that favorite number validation is our custom validation attribute that we have created. So let's look at how this was actually done. Here on our server-side setup, in terms of creating a custom validation, first we added a reference to the system.componentModel.dataAnnotations class. Now we have a new validation class that inherits from the validation attribute. Then we add attribute usage attribute for specifications, and this will allow the multiple for a property. We can have a true or false set to the targets there, and also we can say if it's inherited true or false, which means that it would apply to the derivative attribute classes. So next on our server-side setup, we're actually going to be doing the custom code of it. First we need to define the fields that we're going to be used. So we're going to have a min and a max number for our range. Then we're going to define our custom attribute, and here we can have the default exception. Favorite is out of range is what will be thrown if it comes back not true. And here's our override for the isValid method. So when it comes back and says is this method valid, it'll say yes or no based on the condition contained within it, where we have if number is less than the min number or number is greater than the max number, then return false, else return true. So that is our very basic custom validation. So here we have the way this kind of looks when it's all together. Here we apply the new custom attribute by decorating the model field within that. So we're decorating our favorite number model field, which is just an integer. We have the required attribute already there saying the error message, saying favorite number is required. Then we have our second validation attribute of favorite number validation, which we just built. So that was an example of creating your very custom validation message within MVC4. In this demo, we're going to be looking at creating a custom attribute to go along with the other attributes that we have in our model class, just in case we need a very specific attribute outside of the normal required range or so forth. So here we're going to go through the process of actually setting up our own attribute and putting it into play in our model and then checking it out and making sure it works. So the first thing we need to do in our application is we need to go into our app, and then we need to put our attribute somewhere. Now we could add it to filters, but in this particular case I'm going to add it to a folder I just created called code. So this is just a normal class that we're going to make, so just add new class, and here we're going to call this favorite type, favorite age.cs, actually favorite age attribute, just to distinguish it. And right out of the gate we want to inherit from the validation attribute class, and you can just right click on that and hit resolve, and it's going to be using the system.componentModel.dataAnnotations, so that way it'll pick up and be recognized just like all the other data annotations we have. And then within this we need to set some properties up that we can use when we call it within our model. So the first one we're going to do is just an integer for minimum age, and we'll do a get set. Next one we'll do maximum age, doing our get set, and now we're going to create our public method here for favorite age attribute, And in here we're going to just set the defaults. So this dot minimum age equals, we'll just say 0, and this dot maximum age, equals int dot max value. So that just basically says as high as an integer can go, that could be the possible max. Because we don't want to restrict it to like 5 and 10 out of the gate. You know, you want to leave it wide open. So if somebody just says favorite age attribute, then that's what it ends up being. Okay. So now we need to override the isValid method. So we return a true false, which this will kick off our validation in our model if it's valid or not. So we need to do public override bool is valid, and it automatically dumps in our method for us and kind of sets it up because it kind of knows what we're trying to do. So first thing we need to do is int value equal to, we're going to cast the value as an integer because we know it's supposed to be an integer coming across. And we're going to say if the int value is not equal null, then run this code beneath. And simply we're just going to do a check to see if the int value is greater than or equal to the minimum age, and if the value is less than or equal to this dot maximum age. Pretty straightforward. So we'll return true if those two conditions are true. If it's not true, then simply we're just going to return false. It's a pretty simple attribute. It's sort of like a range. If we're just saying, hey, if you're between this and this, do something. So you can obviously see how you can elaborate more on this, and you can have a bunch of different custom things from this attribute. You could also do lookups against databases or what have you, just to see if something's true or not. So that kind of wraps up our attribute. Now we need to go put this in play in our model. So in Solution Explorer, we're going to go to our model, go to our dog, we're going to go down to age here, go make a new line, and we're just going to say favorite age, which we already have it. And in here, we can say minimum age equals, we'll say minimum age equals 2, maximum age equals 6, we'll make it 10. And then our error message, which automatically gets added because we're inheriting the validation attribute. So our error message is outside of my favorite age group. So that'll be our error message, and then we just simply wrap it up. So this is our custom validation data annotation sitting on top of age. So let's go ahead and save it, and we will run it, seeing what goes on here. Okay. Alright, so now let's go into our dog list and go ahead and say create new. Let's give it a name of test. It's going to be a male. We'll give it age of 11, which is outside of our range. And just make sure everything else is there. There we go. So here's our custom attribute that got fired off because that's age 11. So let's change that to 10. And you notice that because of the unobtrusive JavaScript, the error automatically went away. Although that did not go away because that was queued off of the server validation coming back. So if I say 10, it should be happy. And yes, there it is, 10. And this also works on the edit screen. So if I say 15, again, it yells at me because I took that out. So I'll put it back to 6. I just changed it to 6. And it goes away, save, and there it is. So go ahead and stop this. So again, to add a custom data annotation, it's really not difficult at all. The main thing you have to remember is that in your class, you have to inherit from the validation attribute class in order to pick up all the extra pieces that you need for a correct data annotation. In MVC4, this has obviously been made a little bit more simplistic if you have done this in previous versions of MVC, where you had to inherit a couple other things for like client-side validation and so forth. So anyways, this has been a great example of creating a custom data annotation within MVC4. Displaying validation errors in MVC is pretty straightforward. This is enabled by default for client-side validation. This provides a rich, responsive user interface for your web application. By default, it uses unobtrusive JavaScript, which is enabled by default. This helps keep the presentation and behavior separate in the UI. Also, this supports progressive enhancements for browsers that may not support JavaScript or have it enabled. You can also turn off client-side validation within the web config as well as the unobtrusive JavaScript. This is the app settings key that you would do, which is client validation enabled. By default, this is enabled to true. You would set that to false to turn off all client-side validation. In this try it out, we want to open up our dog application so we can see how some of the validation is taking place. So with our dog application open, let's go ahead and open up our dog controller under the controllers folder and scroll down to our create methods that are doing a post, and you'll notice by the attribute it'll say HTTP post above it, above the create. And let's go ahead and set a breakpoint on the if this model is not valid statement here. So we set a breakpoint. Now let's go ahead and hit F5 so we can see what this looks like in the browser, all rendered out. So when the home page comes up, go ahead and click on your dog list link. And when you're on the index, go ahead and click Create New. And then what we want to do is view the HTML source of this page. So right click anywhere on the page and click View Source. And this may look a little bit different if you're not using Internet Explorer 9 or greater. And scroll down where we find the inputs for like the name field. So here we have input and we have class that's just added on there. But then we have a bunch of these data-val, data-val length, and so forth. What's to note is those are HTML5 attributes actually interjected into our form labels. And these are enabled by default from MVC when we have client validation enabled within the web config. So what's really nice is that it automatically interjects that, and we didn't have to custom write any of that for us. So let's go ahead and close down our view source, and go ahead and close your browser too, which will stop the debugging. And now what we want to do is we want to go into our web config and disable the client validation. Go ahead and hit save, and then go ahead and hit F5 again, and this will open it back up with client validation disabled this time. So go ahead and click on your dog list and go back to hit create new, and now let's right click on the page and hit view source again, and we notice we have a lot less code coming in here. Here's our input field for our name again, and notice that there's no HTML5 automatically added to it for the client-side validation. And all we did was turn the client-side validation off, so it automatically did not put that in there via the MVC. So let's go ahead and try to run this. We'll just go ahead and hit create on this page. Notice there was no client-side validation that took place. It automatically went straight back to the do a server-side post. And obviously it is going to return an error. I'll just go ahead and step through this because that page is not valid. Go ahead and hit F5 to hop through it. And now we have, this is all server-side validation that has just occurred. So let's go ahead and close our browser, which will stop the debugging. close any extra pages they may have opened. Go back into our web config. We will turn this back to true. Go ahead, save. Hit F5 again. So what this is doing is turning back on our client-side validation. So go ahead and click the dog list, and we'll go back into create new again. And this time we'll just go hit create. And we are hopping through our model yet again. And here are all of our errors that have occurred. So this is an example of how you can turn on and off the client validation in MVC4 very easily.